Hard Truth of Zone Zero, Understanding Impending New Defensible Space Zones, Fire Safety or Misguided Mandate is tonight's program, which you are all here for, so presumably tonight. So I think that we all have a lot of questions about Zone Zero, what it is, especially now as the fire situation gets more and more urgent with the recent Eden fire. I'm sure we're all questioning what the rules are. How does this affect vegetation management? What are the implications? So we are excited this evening to have Diana Nicole as our speaker for our program. She has been working for over 20 years in the field, thinking about and designing fire-resistant gardens that also support biodiversity. And so she is here via Zoom to help us learn more about the Zone Zero proposed mandates, including potential financial, ecological, and safety implications involved. So without further ado, let us hear from Nicole.
Hi, thanks, Roger. Hi, everyone. I can't see you with this share screen, but I'm delighted to be here this evening, and I plan to leave ample time for Q&A, and I hope that that will be a conversational type of Q&A. I was in a marathon session. I think it is the sixth time I have been in the Board of Forestry and Fire Protections workshop on Zone Zero today, so I'm a little tired and my voice is a little low, but don't take it personally. So technically, I am an ecological horticulturalist, which is a fancy way of saying that I design and manage gardens that are beautiful while also providing habitat for plant and wildlife communities. They capture carbon and water, they lower temperatures and help defend structure fires. So I come from the landscape side of fire risk in this. And I'm here, as Roger said, to talk about the new defensible space rulemaking that's coming from Sacramento, the state of California. And it's being developed by the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. And I would say the insurance industry has a big part in that too. The rule will impact a lot of homeowners. And I'm going to refer to some notes because we have new information since we were in the meeting today, but a number was given in the Board of Forestry meeting today on Zone Zero of 875 million properties that will be affected by this new mandate. Special shout out to Dr. Travis Moncour with UCLA Department of Environment and Sustainability. He has been just an absolute wonderful resource to help process a lot of this information that's come to us, and in big part has contributed to this PowerPoint. And in fact, there's going to be another PowerPoint on Zone Zero for people who missed this or who want a little different perspective through the lens of a scientist through our LA Audubon program. I am on the board of Los Angeles Audubon Society. I'm the vice president. Travis is my former president of Los Angeles Audubon Society, and we have Zone Zero being presented on July 30th. And if I had my act together, I would be putting that in the chat for you, but I can always send that and you all can decide if you want to send it out. So the law was passed in 2020. And basically what it says is that the state's guidance around defensible space will include what is called an ember resistant zone in the area of 0 to 5 feet from structures. They're decks, patios, and eaves. It's called Zone Zero because there's already a Zone 1. That's been around since 1965. And Zone 2, which I believe has been around since 2006. So to add another zone closer to the house, they used 0 because 1 and 2 was already taken. I only mention that because it wasn't ever supposed to mean 0 vegetation. That's just how the numbers worked out. The law was not supposed to go into effect until a new ember-resistant zone rule was written by the State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. However, after the recent LA fires, Newsom signed an executive directive which included the Board of Forestry to have them complete the final rulemaking for the law. And the order from Newsom is to have it completed by December of this year. So before defining what Zone 0 and the other zones will do, I wanted to look at where they're going to apply. Because the Board of Forestry recently expanded the Fire Severity Hazard Zone maps. And those fire hazard severity zones fall into one of the following classifications. We have moderate, we have high, and we have very high. Zone 0 applies to the very high and the very high, I guess, well, and the high and the very high fire severity zones. But I think the area that we're mostly interested in is the local areas. There's a state areas that have the high and the very high fire severity zones. But in the city and urban areas, it's under local jurisdiction. So this means that Zone 0 rules are now going to apply to areas that have never been mapped because of the expansion as high fire severity zones before, or even probably hazard zones at all. And for, I'm in the city of Los Angeles, so this is my familiarity, but for an example, Hollywood Boulevard, the Sunset Strip, Northern Chinatown, Brentwood, south of Sunset Strip will all be in the very high fire severity zone. So this new rule is now going to apply to places that even have tall buildings, lots of pavement, highly urbanized areas, from there all the way to a remote cabin in Northern California on a ranch. One rule from Chica to Chinatown. And again, 875 million properties will be affected. So there's currently a draft that says you will not be allowed any landscaping materials, including but not limited to grass, groupings of plants, shrubs, branches, weeds, leaves, bark, and wood chip mulch. You can have 10 or fewer potted plants that are no more than 18 inches tall if they're in areas that are not beneath, above, or next to a window or a glass door or a vent, are kept unaffixed in non-combustible pot, and not any larger than in a 5-gallon pot, set apart by 1.5 times their size or 12 inches, whichever is greater from the structure and each other. And the pots have to be maintained so there's no dead or dying material on the plants. It does allow, and this is newer, allow for single specimen trees as long as the canopy is maintained at least 5 feet above the adjacent roof and the sides of the building structure, 10 feet away from chimneys and stovepipe pipe outlets. But you can't have a privacy hedge or groupings of plants, such as a small patch of ground covers in Zone 0. So for people who live on a small lot in dense communities, it likely means no plants at all. And so this effectively is a no landscape zone. For the areas that are affected in the highly urbanized communities, we've looked at those maps, and street trees would also be possibly have to be removed for this. So if the zone rules go through, we're going to lose a significant amount of canopy and privacy and security and shade and birds. And converting these landscapes will come at a cost because there's a large expanse of vegetation that surrounds existing homes, especially older homes. And the Board of Forestry rulemaking public meeting, so they proudly showed a property conversion in Audubon, California, which is not a place I've ever been, but a little suburban town north of Sacramento, where they cut down 10 redwoods and a black oak tree. They said cutting them down was $13,000. I think it would be 5 times that here in Los Angeles. They added some hardscape, did a little home hardening, and that brought the cost of converting this property to somewhere in the nature of $20,000 or more. Again, I think it would be much more here to do that. And, you know, and more, I guess, if you had to put retaining walls in, if it's a slope, but in this case, it was a flat piece of property. MySafeLA has written a sign-on letter about their concern about this rule and how it could provide insurance companies with a quote green light to cancel or deny coverage to homeowners who, especially I guess when they're unable to achieve 100% compliance, regardless of contextual factors such as construction type, adjacent structures, slope, or ability to pay the cost of the upgrades. Zone Zero also makes it easier for insurance providers to deny claims. So at the Board of Forestry Zone Zero workshop, this photo was proudly presented as a model for defensible space. Despite this gravelscape, the house was still uninsured at the time of this presentation in April. So, why do these rules matter? You know, loss of privacy, loss of shade. So the rule now allows 4 trees in Zone Zero, and that's a new development. However, they're single specimen trees, meaning individual trees. So in a case like this, yes, the hedge would have to come out because it doesn't allow groupings of plants or hedges. And in a situation like this, the property owner would have to choose. I just X'd out the middle tree because by doing that, it would likely have be able to maintain the trees on either side of that middle tree. And those trees would probably have to be limbed up. And they are very close to the structure, to the house, and pruned at least 5 feet back. So loss of habitat is another reason why these rules matter. This is aerial picture in my neighborhood. I chose this just because I'm familiar with the surroundings and what those plants are that are around those houses. My house is in there too. Even if, and this was done before they just passed this, well, yeah, you can have trees if they're single specimen trees in Zone Zero. Even if I took out every other red dot, it still would be a lot of vegetation loss, as you can see here. And to be honest with you, I got so tired at putting dots in that I gave up. So I don't think that this is even the full picture. But I did a back of the envelope accounting for the city of Los Angeles, just saying, hey, what if it's just 2 trees or shrubs per property in the high fire severity zone in the city? And I came up with over 40,000 loss of trees or shrubs in just this, and I think it's well over 2 in a lot of areas like this This is Santa Monica Mountains, just south of Ventura Boulevard. And so, my calculation, I think, is grossly conservative. Now that I have this new number of buildings, I think we'll be able to do a better calculation. But Stephanie Landegren, landscape architect, recently retired from UCLA, did her back of the envelope where she did just the number of houses impacted or properties impacted across the state of California, and she only picked every other tree per landscape and came up with, I think it was 2 million trees. I think that also is grossly conservative. And if you'll see in there, a picture, I have a circle around something that looks a little blue and white. The number on it, the house is 3770, if you can see that. That's one of those shade sales. Those would also not be allowed in, and that's in Zone 0. I'm familiar with the property. Those would have to go. Your, shade umbrellas, so you're getting rid of the canopy, the live canopy, and then you also can't have anything to replace that in terms of anything cloth, at least, or wood pergola, any of those things. So cost is another reason why this matters. I touched a little bit on that before, but the cost depends. It depends on the property, the existing landscape, the slope, retention, any hardscaping. It's going to be obviously more expensive in a hillside property like this that has a beautiful native landscape. And so, I think for something like this, you're starting in the $50,000 range. At probably a lot more, right? If you have to stabilize the slope. Or you can do something like this, which is much more economical. It's not a hillside property. And this was also featured at the April Board of Forestry public meeting as a model for Zone 0. Yeah. So the other thing is there are stiff fines associated with noncompliance. A second inspection, at least in the city of Los Angeles, will cost you $764 plus a $1,526 administrative fee if you don't comply. Then you have the cost of a contractor to come in and clear the property for you. I looked into this, and in 2020, the city of Los Angeles got $3.5 million to do I think it was 146 forced clearances by their contractors for properties, all private properties. And when that happens, you automatically have a lien on your house. And those decisions by the department, in this case, the fire department, are not appealable. There is no process for appealing. The only thing you can appeal is after the fact, you can appeal the charges. Seems a little strange. We can appeal a speeding ticket, but not something like this. So I found this image in one of the scientific papers on defensible space. I thought it was a really great visual representation of a core problem with the current defensible space regulations because it conflates fire risk reduction with the near eraser of functional landscaping, especially ecological landscaping. Notice that everything within 100 feet of the house, which is a good part of the lot sizes in Los Angeles, notice that it is labeled um, the 0 to 100 feet is labeled defensible space. And you see the type of spacing they would like us to have. Those are specimen, right? Plantings. And then it isn't until you get to the second 100 feet or the 100 foot mark that they call that landscaping. Even though a lot of properties here don't have that second level where they would call that landscaping. But basically, for more small lots, medium-sized lots, our entire yard is now redefined as a fire buffer, not a garden. So, specimen planting, I would argue, is not landscaping. Specimen is a plant that's on display, often surrounded by hardscape or mulch, certainly not part of an ecological system. But the real danger of this specimen planting approach that they want, in zone 1 and zone 2, which goes from 5 feet to 100 feet. The real danger of this approach is that it does not retain shade or provide shade. It doesn't retain moisture, certainly not in a way a garden should, especially a garden or a landscape should in a fire-prone area. A dry, droughty landscape is a high-risk landscape in a fire zone. And as an ecological horticulturalist, I also worry about, ecological traps in a landscape like this, especially if we're planting natives. So let's see what the science says. Zone 0 and the other zones are based on a simple idea: eliminate the vegetation to reduce home ignition during fires. But recent research led by fire ecologists challenges this outdated fire defense, and it calls for a science-based path forward. The State Board of Forestry has used a lot of their own science, helped by the insurance industry. And they use a lot of industry simulations and demonstrations. I heard one of the fellows from the insurance industry call it experiments. I would tend to agree with them. But all of that to support their defensible space zone rules. Homes are tested in warehouses and parking lots using embers blown at test structures without plants. Sometimes they put plants in containers, but these demonstrations and simulations are really experiments that don't reflect real world fires or conditions. And a recent study used by the Board of Forestry to support their vegetation removal strategy or approach claimed to show that privacy hedges burn with such intensity that they threaten adjacent structures. But when one reads the paper, you discover that the authors did not study a live hedge full of moisture, but rather they constructed a hedge. They took cuttings from a hedge and they let them dry out for 2 weeks in the sun. And then they attached those dried branches to a metal framed structure to make it look like a hedge. And at that point, it had the moisture level of hay. So, of course, it burned. The bottom line with these approaches is that the policies are being made based on models that don't reflect the complexity of real-world urban fires. So a big problem with the Board of Forestry's modeling for their Zone 0 and other defensible space rules focus on, plant removal, is that urban fires are building driven, not vegetation driven. And I think, was it Ty that showed you maybe some examples of that, or I've heard that you all saw some examples of that. But in other words, the structures are the fire's fuel. Dr. John Keeley is a very respected, fire ecologist in Southern California. And he had a presentation not too long ago. This is Altadena. And if you look here, you see all these spot fires. They're all buildings, all structures. In rural or forested areas, vegetation is the primary driver of fire behavior, but that's not true here, or in any other urban areas. And treating urban zones as, mini forests is kind of what's happening here with this policy, at least for urban areas, really does lead to misguided clearance mandates such as Zone Zero that sacrifice ecology and cooling benefits without actually reducing risk so much. Dr. Francisco Escobedo, we're going to talk about his groundbreaking study in a minute. But when I recently attended a presentation that he did at CFAC, he said this, and it's probably the first time I've heard a scientist actually say, hey, look, urban fires and wildfires are different, or the fires we've experienced in Palisades and Eaton were not wildfires, they're urban fires. And Dr. Keeley has said, once the fire hits the urban environment, the vegetation just doesn't matter at that point because it's structure to structure. In urban areas, the peer-reviewed research shows that burning buildings, not vegetation, often ignite structures. And what we saw in the LA fires is structures igniting vegetation, not vegetation igniting structures. And the Board of Forestry, with its Zone Zero rules, has completely ignored this fact. So, lastly, on the science front, the proposed Zone Zero rule really does ignore the protective effect of healthy, well-hydrated vegetation. But recent groundbreaking research from the United States Forest Service, which is the gold standard of science because it's double peer-reviewed, finds that high moisture trees near homes increases survival odds of structures in a fire. So what if the safest thing you could do for your home in an urban fire zone isn't to clear vegetation, but to keep the right kind of moisture retaining shade garden? Before we answer that question, let's understand why LA fires are getting worse. I was really moved by this essay that recently was shared with me from the Urban History Association that tells us that we have engineered the shade and the soil moisture right out of our cities, making them more flammable. This was Bayona Lake in 1902. It's now a lagoon. This was Marina del Rey. I think, is it 1920, I believe. And by the 20th century, we've put the LA River in a coffin and covered waterways, wetlands, flower beds, scrublands, and woodlands with concrete, and we're still doing it. From, the draining of the wetlands to the paving of the creeks to the installation of, these technologies like sand drains that literally took the water out of Los Angeles. We've systematically dried out the land And we've paid the price in heat, dust, and flame. And unfortunately, we have a policy that's in the works that is not going to reverse that, but it's going to double down. So drawing on research from Escobedo, well-hydrated gardens aren't just personal choices. They're acts of defense. I would say they're acts of ecological repair. And in a city that has systematically drained, paved, and hardened its terrain, reintroducing shady, hydrated green space is a form of resilience. It is possible, I think, to do both. You can be water wise and fire smart, but we must abandon the kinds of policies that we have coming out of Sacramento, which is pushing us towards, more dry landscapes, um, more concrete, and gravel and things like that. And they talked a lot in these workshops over the months about saving water. It's actually how the artificial turf grass that was in Zone Zero got taken out, and then put back in today. But if we want a future where LA doesn't burn, we need to plant it, shade it, and water it accordingly. So what should we be doing? Use trees that provide shade, right? Start with canopy, layer native plant communities, which is the absolute opposite of what these defensible space policies want us to do. They don't want layered plants. They want us to have specimen plants. So I always avoid the plant specimen trap, hydrate the soil, capture and store rain, and we do want to avoid fuel traps. That's, well maintained, and that's in the Escobedo study. Well hydrated, well maintained vegetation is actually protective, as long as it's well hydrated and well maintained. So the current status, Board of Forestry Advisory Committee just completed, well, I thought it was completing its public meetings today, but then the chair announced that they were going to have another meeting, and did not say when, but I think he said next month. Zone Zero rules, however, we are set to go into effect January 1, 2026 for new construction, and then existing homes have 3 years to comply. So what should we do in terms of Zone Zero? Well, here's some suggestions. So there is a comment email that's here, public comments at bof.ca.gov. You can send them an email. And the suggestions I have is to ask them to exempt healthy vegetation from the specimen plant rule, focus on dangerous species instead. Although I'm a big proponent of it's not really the species, it's how you maintain the species that's the most important. Exempt, locally protected native species. In the city of Los Angeles, we have all these. In other areas, I know it's just oak trees. And we should definitely be exempting municipal street trees because they are now at risk for removal. Locally, the jurisdiction for enforcement for this is under our municipalities. So I suggest calling your council member. And I don't know, I met with mine and I reasoned with them that they should not enforce this. They hold the purse strings for enforcement, but at least provide an appeals process. So when an inspector makes a determination, you should at least have the ability to have a say in that and be able to appeal it just like you could, like I said, a traffic ticket. And then, of course, plant shade-loving native plant community in your yard, especially if you're in a high fire severity zone, because the moisture is the antidote to the fire. And then, lastly, check with, I just recently put up a new website. I learned how to do Squarespace myself. I was so compelled by this. It is to provide information and kind of a guide through this, and just check diananicole.com for updates on Zone Zero and calls to action on Zone Zero if you're interested, and I hope you are. And that's my uh, contact information. You can just go to the website and contact me through there, and it'll send me an email. And now I'm open for Q&A.
Thank you. We have a couple of hands up in the room, and we have a question that was asked in the chat. Let me take the chat one first. What if the plants are rooted on someone else's property, but within 5 feet of your structure? You're not allowed to cut down plants not on your property.
So, yeah, and I'm trying to see if I can get my screen so I can see you. So if you give me just a moment.
Um,
Not sure how I do that, or maybe we take it off share.
let me see. Let me see. I should be able to. Okay. I should have done this before. Apologies. The meeting owl now should have a camera and be able to see that. Okay, so people in the room. So Ty, you had a question?
Okay, I have it. So to answer that first question, Roger, so you are responsible only to the required, footage. So if we're talking about zone zero, it's 5 feet from the your structure or your patio or any structure, right? But if it encroaches on somebody else's property, and it often does in these denser environments, you are only responsible to your property line. That said, there's been a lot of people rightfully concerned about overlapping. And someone just mentioned the other day that they neighbor put an ADU right up against their hedge. And we have some new rules now, at least in the city of Los Angeles, where, you only have a 4-foot setback if you're installing ADUs in these areas. So there's a really good questions, and I have been brought up to the Board of Forestry, and they have not answered them.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Ty. This is gonna be complicated in a lot of ways because I mean, even currently, brush clearance zones extend beyond your property line. And that's been a bone of contention over lots of, especially rural properties. But I was gonna suggest that one of the things, the ways to fight back on this is if they're gonna require us to take out protected trees and trees that are doing things like carbon sequestration and plants, then they should be responsible for the mitigation for removal of those trees. Because right now, if you take out a protected tree, you have to pay mitigation or do mitigation. And if they're forcing you to do it, then they should be the ones, that would be a taking. They need to be responsible for that. So that's another avenue to fight back. I don't know how effective it'll be, but.
Yeah, I wonder if that's like a local, it's a really good point, Ty. I wonder if that's another item to put on. I mean, I'd like those trees to be exempted, right? If that doesn't happen, it seems like that's a local, that's something to talk to your council person about if you have a protected tree ordinance.
Okay.
Hi Diana, Karen Suarez here. I attended a bit of the UCLA workshop and that was great. I really have to thank you, Diana, everybody in this organization in UCLA, because I think that the noise that we're making, pardon the reference, has fueled some stepping back on these. And I think the more we keep it up, we can make some change. So first of all, thank you very, very much. And I think it's just ridiculous, and we have to take into consideration the things you said and climate change and seeing the forest to the trees in our future. But thank you.
I'd like to just thank you so much because this has been a lot of hard work from a lot of volunteers. I've been attending these marathon workshops since March, and they're really tough to get through because there's a lot of nonsense and junk science and industry folks there. And so it's been a lot of hard work and then translating that because one of the things is most people don't know about this. When they do, they don't like it. And I think that's by design from Sacramento. We've met with council members here locally that didn't really know about it. And then today, in terms of climate, it was really frustrating to hear one of the presenters for the Zone Zero Board of Forestry talk about vegetation, despite the fact she's not an expert in vegetation, she's an expert in other things, and climate, and making the case that, well, things are going to get hotter, so the vegetation in our yards is going to get drier. And that's a good reason to take them out. And that was the case she was making. Unfortunately, it's not conversational in these workshops, so I'd already done my 3 minutes of public comment. But I would have said, had I had that ability, the last thing you want to do is take out the plants and have a drier landscape, because that will be the result in a high fire severity zone. And by the way, Francesco Escobedo of that groundbreaking double peer-reviewed study that just says, hey, listen, the plants aren't the enemy, the loss of moisture is, was there and presented and was completely ignored.
I put it as like a bowling alley. When you take out the vegetation, the ambers just go, roll straight up to the structure. And the, trees like the oak trees and other brush are, grab the fire and hold it. And I do think they need to concentrate on house hardening, and they can't tell everybody to do that because of the expense, but they're doing this with the vegetation. So, I just think we need to turn it back on them completely with the house hardening.
Yeah, there's a comment in the chat about no home hardening requirements in the works. So yeah, that same comment. Also want to mention another comment in the chat. Noah mentions, not only is this ecologically costly, but we're already living in an affordability crisis, and policies like this increase cost of living. A penalty-driven approach only makes California more unaffordable.
Absolutely. I know that I'm living in a very modest home in a nice neighborhood, but I bought before the market went kaboom. I have, retirees living with me around me on fixed incomes. But there is a law that was passed in Sacramento that's I forget the number, that potentially provide assistance for zone zero conversions for people of certain low incomes that you might qualify. However, that is just sitting there. It hasn't gone through. It might, but they're going to pass this through. It's going to go to Newsom's desk in December, very likely, and be, codified, and the low income assistance isn't going to probably materialize.
Okay,
Jennifer Plant, I have just a quick question on what your experience with, what Edison is up to is. If you have been, kind of watching what they're doing, they're kind of, this, onslaught of activity with Edison and the utility tree service companies and these 12-foot barriers, et cetera. So I'm just wondering if you're hearing anything about them and what you're hearing.
Has not come up in this work at all in any of the meetings on either side, except for somebody made a public comment today saying that his neighborhood was right next to, and I don't know if it was Edison or another power company, and made the point, hey, you want me to cut everything down around my house, yet the utility company isn't doing what he felt was needed to be done. So that's as much as involvement I've seen with that.
Okay, Robin Smith has her hand up in the online, and then we have two people in the room who wanted to say. So Robin, go ahead.
Hey, Robin.
Hi, Di. Thank you, guys. Hey, Di, can you explain how cities, municipalities have to foot the bill for the fire inspection programs in their communities? I think I understand city budgets have to cover those costs. And how does that work?
Yeah, so it's actually even though the law is coming out of the state of California, the jurisdiction in the local responsibility areas, which is what we have in cities, is under the municipality. And it is their budget. As far as I know, they haven't got money from Sacramento, but that's as far as I know. So it comes out of the municipal budget for the enforcement piece of it. In fact, the city of Los Angeles right now has a cancel file asking LAFD to report back on how they will enforce this. And what they mean by that is, what do you need resource-wise? What do you need money-wise? I hope that answers your question. But it comes out of the municipal budget.
And then my follow-up question is, well, what if the city doesn't have enough money or doesn't have the financial means to pay for the program? What does the city do?
Well, I would like that to be the case in my city, because no enforcement means I have a get out of jail free card, I guess. It all rests on enforcement. But it's a great question, Robin, and I don't know what they do other than maybe they don't. Here's what I think will happen, because already LAFD is hampered by lack of funding. Enforcement is random. So and I think that's terrible. Especially, there were 3 presenters today at the Board of Forestry workshop. 2 of them gave great presentation. I'm sorry, 4 presenters, and 3 of them gave great presentations on how none of this works unless the entire neighborhood complies. You don't reduce risk at all unless you have home hardening, and all the other things that they say we need to do. And if any of those, and even then, if somebody didn't rake the leaves from under their oak tree that morning, the whole thing may go up in a blaze. So I think you have random enforcement, which is also really unfair to property owners.
Okay, you had a question.
Jessica Richards. I'm a local Pasadena person who's gotten involved in tree advocacy there, and went to a talk by Stephanie a couple months ago about Zone Zero, which has put that on my radar. So I'm grateful to learn even more, because I run a social media account trying to raise awareness for these types of issues. So I'm going to take some of the things that I'm learning here to try to get more people on board with this. But I have a question because I do think, like you said, most people just don't even realize what's happening and it's gonna affect 875 million people. Yeah, I mean, it's just outrageous numbers. That even if the local jurisdiction, let's say, Monrovia says we're not gonna enforce this, we appeal to reason, right? And they say we're not, isn't it still the insurance companies will have every right to cancel everyone's policy that doesn't apply? Like, even that concession won't solve the problem. Am I correct in understanding that the insurance company will ultimately, regardless of what a municipality decides to do, be the enforcer?
I agree.
So yes, and I would just add that, the state law definitely impacts insurance. And
Right.
so one of the things that I had on in my presentation is that this makes it really easy. So if you do, the more prescriptive, right? The
Right.
more one size fits all, as if, it's not the same here as in Northern California, for example, right? The more prescriptive and one size fits all, the easier it is for a insurance provider to deny claims. But the other thing is that, when I say deny claims, well, so okay, let's say, gosh, another fire, and there will be one, and you lose your structure in a fire. It's very easy for insurance company to look at one of the prescriptions, like zone 0, and say, oh, that, potted plant that you had there was next to your, or under your window.
Right.
Deny.
Drones, and already it's happening in Pasadena where they're denying people's renewals based on drone footage of a tree that's on their property. So it's already happening.
Okay, another question.
Yeah, my name is Catherine Gallagher, and it's more just, what is your sense of also appealing to Newsom if he's gonna be the final stop? If, he wants it done soon, but I know he also bristles when federal government tells him he should rake his forests, right? So is he reasonable enough to appeal to also?
Unfortunately, he's termed out.
And he wrote the executive order.
Yeah, I think Newsom has done a lot of really anti nature things recently, so I don't have a lot of faith in that. I mean, he's the one that put this executive directive together. I mean, not to defend the 3 board members at the Board of Forestry, but they have been given a directive, and they're just following that directive. And so I think that these workshops have been pretty performative. We have been showing up very strongly in Los Angeles. The other big group that's been showing up is Berkeley, because don't forget, or if you don't already know, your municipality can adopt more strict rules. And so that's what Berkeley did. They decided to get ahead of the game, and it's really dramatic what's happening. And community there has grouped together and formed and hired an attorney to fight this, because they don't feel confident that there's a political solution here, that when it gets on Newsom's desk, he's going to sign it.
What if like if currently Newsom is planning to become president, in for the next term, that means that this could end up becoming a lot of bad press. I don't know if it makes an impact, because people will just look at us and say, well, this is not daily impact, but still, can we not go social and bring it up and maybe join with Berkeley into a class action or something like that, just out of curiosity?
Well, it would be great if the California Native Plant Society took a position against this, because right now in the the big greens have been missing from taking a position on this. I do think that because enforcement, however, is under local jurisdiction. That if I'm going to think about how's the best use of my time, it's to talk to my local policymakers, because I think this is going to be really uncomfortable for them. I mean, are they going to tell my elderly neighbor next door that she has to take out her beloved magnolia tree because it's too close to her house? And if she doesn't, they're going to send their unskilled contractors in to cut it down forcibly and charge her, close to $4,000. I mean, I don't think that's very popular, but I also would say that the Board of Forestry got a slow start. We're the group that's kind of organized under the hosting of UCLA and Los Angeles has really shown up at these working workshop meetings for the Board of Forestry and done everything to get the word out. I think today they announced that they've had about 800 and some odd comments. Again, grossly inadequate for the entire state of California. And so, and I believe that that's not because people aren't interested, it's because there's been no state campaign, there's been no education or information campaign about this. So most people don't know about what's coming. But I do encourage folks to put in your comments, write a letter. It can be very simple. Just say, I'm not okay with this. And because I think the more comments, the better.
Okay, we have Julie Clark online, and then a person in the room, and then Adrien. So Julie, go ahead.
Thank you, Roger. Diana, I read a couple of weeks ago a very compelling science-based letter that was an op-ed in a local paper written by a state assembly member representing Santa Monica Mountains and Ventura County. And I got the feeling it was being sent to the Board of Forestry. What do you know about other legislators, state legislators, or local officials who may be pushing back on this Zone Zero concept?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly met with council members here as part of a group to say, because one of the things that we found out was that under AB 3074, which is the state law that was passed in 2020, it said, you need an ember resistant zone. Unfortunately, that's now morphed into a no landscaping zone. But it also says that they're supposed to consult with the local government. And when we met with our local government, none of them really knew anything about it. And it was one of my first questions was, what consultation or what outreach from the Board of Forestry have you had about Zone Zero? And every case, in every meeting, it was none. So I think that's an important point. As far as, your question, there could be some things behind the scenes happening. The only letter that I have seen is actually from Laura Friedman that she wrote to the Board of Forestry, kind of, very politely and diplomatically saying, I think you've taken this too far. This was not the intent of my legislation.
I can answer a little more on, not at least related to that. And it was related to something I haven't had a chance to do yet, and that is give our chapter council presentation. But after the chapter council meeting last time, 25 of us from the chapter council and CNPS Sacramento went and lobbied 5 different legislatures for each team. So at least 25 or 30 legislators in Sacramento sat down with them, or their aides mostly, and gave them a presentation about what was wrong with this rulemaking. And we also gave them a stack of our materials. So, we're trying and, encourage everybody to do the same, because ultimately they're the ones that make the rules, ultimately. So, get your legislator, get your assembly person and your state senator and write them.
And it is an election coming up for governor. So there's really great candidates, Betty Yee, Lenny Penelagas, Tony Atkins, people that we can ask them when, as they're running for governor, you know, what is your stance on this? And then that the elections help fuel the conversation. And we also talked on the UCLA workshop about hiring a publicist, but who pays for it to run an ad to fix this too.
So one of the things that UCLA did was give a formal invitation for the Board of Forestry, because they're up in Sacramento. Come on down to Southern California. We'll show you around. We'll show you what this means, you know, because the practical application of all of this is really awful. And they have yet to accept that offer. I think that's important if you're talking to policymakers.
Okay, another question in the room.
Stephen Kutcher. First, I applaud your presentation and your work. Second, I think that one of the biggest problems is unequitable. There are wood homes, there are stucco homes. What about the person whose livelihood depends on his garden, and his garden is his whole backyard? And not only that, he has a sprinkler system set up in his yard, just in case of fire. What happens to that person?
Right.
I also want to be clear about something. I don't know what made me think of this, but does everyone know that municipal water systems can't deliver the water to the hydrants in a fire event like Eaton and Palisades? Okay.
Yes, Trump educated a lot of us on it.
Okay, I'd like to take one more online, Adrene, and then we need to wrap up somewhat soon because we're getting on towards, we need to be cleared out of the room in 15, 20 minutes. 17 minutes.
Thank you so much for this presentation. And from what I'm understanding is basically we should be calling our sort of local governments, our local officials, and telling them our thoughts on this, writing one thing, second thing, writing the Board of Forestry specifically on this. The other question I have is for people who work at a municipality or a local jurisdiction. This is not something that necessarily we have been talking about, and it flies against like everything that we've been doing in urban planning to actually increase the urban canopy in the developed urban areas that are, you know, suffering from all sorts of equity issues. So it just kind of completely goes against everything we've been trying to do.
100%. We have
Yeah.
somebody in our, sorry if I cut you off.
Oh,
We
no,
have
go for it. Thank you.
We have somebody, it's such a good point. We have somebody in our group. I mean, look at the street tree plantings, right? And we have somebody in the UCLA hosted group who is a commissioner with DWP. And she said, we have all these programs for tree planting. And we did all of this tree planting. We put a lot of money into this, and to have them just be taken down, you know, is just untenable.
Right. And not to mention, you know, if you're a pedestrian, you take public transit, like that just makes everything so much more unsustainable and more difficult. But thank you. I really appreciate this.
Well, my goal is to I don't think enough policymakers have heard from the community because the community doesn't know.
Yeah.
And, you know, at large.
So is there anything we are doing to educate the community? There is a lot of good information here, right? For a lot of Californians, middle class, struggling Californians, the fact that there is a financial impact would actually hit a lot more. And if those are the points that we communicate either on Facebook, Insta, TikTok, or however, where regular people go and check, would that, you know, no pun intended, start a fire in the right way?
So, and thank you for asking that question. I just remembered. So right now in the works, there'll be information on the website I gave you, Diana, Nicole.com. So check that website often, please. But also there's going to be a dedicated website called zonezerofacts.com. And when that happens, I will let you all know. And there will be all kinds of information, I'm assuming, and updates, and also a way to just click a button and have a comment letter go directly to the Board of Forestry. And hopefully, I'm going to encourage the people working on that website to also have a way for it to go to your representatives up in Sacramento.
And
Thank
if you
you.
have an opportunity, have an ability to make it a little bit customizable,
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
say a lot, it's a custom letter.
I would like to say that, in my, reading about, what affects politicians, right now, what affects them is your phone call. Hi, my name is something, I live in something zip code, I am your constituent, I have this concern. I'll write that down for anyone who wants it.
Orchid, you're completely right. I actually am going to encourage, I brought this up, I'm going to try it again. I think having some little scripts available on that Zone Zero Facts would be great for people, because I know a lot of people haven't done this before and they're kind of scared, especially when it comes to public comment. But you're absolutely right, Orchid. I have a friend who's an ex-chief of staff for old city council member, and she told me right from the beginning, pick up the phone and call, because that is interrupting their day. It's really easy to ignore emails and letters, not the phone so much.
Thank you, Diana. I really appreciate your sharing all this with us.
And July 30th, can I send that to you or Orchid or Roger or David, and so people can have a chance to ask questions of the Dr. Travis Longcore, especially when it comes to the mapping. He's really an expert at that.
Thank you. I think we need to call it a night. So thank you, Diana. Really appreciate your help.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.